If he has a wife or girlfriend and still seeks you, this is what's really going on. There's a specific kind of attention that feels different from anything else. It's intense, focused, and wrapped in secrecy. It makes you feel seen in a way you haven't felt in years, maybe decades. And it's coming from a man who already has someone else. At 65, Carol thought she was past the point of being flattered into confusion. She'd raised 3 children, buried a husband, built a successful career, and emerged on the other side with clarity about who she was and what she deserved. But then James walked into her life at a professional conference, and suddenly that clarity became clouded. He was attentive in ways that felt rare. He remembered details from their conversations. He texted her thoughtful questions about her day. He made her feel like the most fascinating woman in the room. The only problem? James mentioned his wife casually in their third conversation, almost as an afterthought, and then continued pursuing Carol as if that detail changed nothing. Carol found herself in territory she never imagined navigating at this stage of life. She wasn't looking to be the other woman. She hadn't set out to disrupt anyone's marriage. But James kept showing up, kept reaching out, kept making her feel special. And she started wondering, if his marriage was solid, why would he be seeking this connection with her? Maybe his wife didn't understand him. Maybe they were staying together for convenience or finances. Maybe what he felt for Carol was real in a way his marriage hadn't been in years. These are the stories we tell ourselves when a partnered man pursues us, because the alternative, the truth that Carl Jung spent decades exploring in his work on human psychology, is much more uncomfortable to accept. And that truth is what we need to talk about today. Before we go further, I need you to subscribe to this channel right now. Not because I'm trying to boost numbers, but because what I'm about to share will make some people uncomfortable, and this video might not be recommended to you again. We're going to talk about the psychological patterns that drive partnered men to pursue women outside their relationships, what it means about him and not about you, and why understanding Carl Jung's theories about the human psyche will protect you from becoming collateral damage in someone else's unresolved issues. So subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's talk about what's really happening when he has someone at home, but he's still seeking you. Jung talked extensively about what he called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge or integrate into our conscious identity. And one of the most important things to understand about the partnered man who pursues you is this: you're not dealing with his authentic self. You're dealing with his shadow. When a man has a wife or girlfriend but continues seeking connection with you, he's not responding to who you actually are. He's responding to what you represent in his internal psychological landscape. Jung would say that you've become a projection screen for aspects of himself or his desires that he can't reconcile within his primary relationship. Barbara was 68 when she met Martin at a community art class. He was married, openly so, but he sought out Barbara's company consistently. He'd position himself next to her during sessions. He'd ask her opinion on his work with an intensity that felt personal. He'd linger after class to continue conversations, and eventually he started suggesting coffee meetups that had nothing to do with art. Martin's wife, he explained, didn't understand his creative side. She was practical, focused on their retirement planning and their grandchildren's activities. She thought his interest in painting was a frivolous hobby. Barbara, on the other hand, took art seriously. She engaged with him on a level his wife never could. Didn't that mean something? What Martin didn't understand, and what Barbara eventually learned, is that she wasn't special in the way he claimed. She was convenient.
She represented the part of Martin's identity that he'd suppressed in his marriage, the artistic, spontaneous, creative self that his wife's practical nature made him feel he couldn't fully express. Rather than doing the difficult internal work of integrating those parts of himself or communicating with his wife about feeling unseen, Martin projected that entire aspect of his identity onto Barbara and pursued the projection. Jung would say this is shadow work that Martin was refusing to do within himself, so he was acting it out through an external relationship instead. And here's the crucial part. This dynamic has nothing to do with Barbara's actual value as a person, and everything to do with Martin's internal fragmentation. The partnered man who seeks you isn't seeing you clearly. He's seeing what he needs you to be in order to avoid confronting what's broken inside himself or inside his primary relationship. You've become a character in his psychological drama, not a full human being with your own needs, boundaries, and future. Carol eventually asked James directly, "If what we have is so meaningful, why aren't you leaving your wife?" His answer was telling. He talked about timing, about not wanting to hurt her, about financial complications, about waiting for the right moment. What he never talked about was a concrete plan or a genuine intention to change his circumstances. Because James didn't actually want to leave his wife. He wanted to keep his stable home life while also experiencing the excitement and validation that came from pursuing Carol. He wanted two contradictory things simultaneously. And rather than choosing, he was attempting to have both by compartmentalizing his life. Jung called this the problem of the divided self. When we refuse to make difficult choices or integrate conflicting desires, we split ourselves into fragments that can't communicate with each other. James had one self that was a husband, a provider, a man invested in his long-term partnership. And he had another self that craved novelty, intensity, and the ego boost that comes from conquest. Rather than reconciling these parts or making an honest choice, he was acting out both while being fully committed to neither. And Carol? She was caught in the crossfire of James's internal civil war, a war that had nothing to do with her worth and everything to do with his refusal to do his own psychological work. Jung also wrote about what he called the anima, the unconscious feminine qualities within a man's psyche. And understanding this concept is critical to understanding why the partnered man who pursues you often seems to be seeking something almost mystical or impossible to define. The anima represents qualities like emotional depth, intuition, receptivity, and connection. In a psychologically healthy man, these qualities are integrated into his conscious personality. He's comfortable with his emotional life, he can access vulnerability, he seeks genuine intimacy that includes both physical and emotional connection. But many men, especially men in long-term relationships that have settled into routine and predictability, lose touch with their anima. The relationship becomes functional rather than deeply connected. Conversations revolve around logistics, bills, schedules, family obligations, home repairs. The emotional and spiritual dimension that once made the relationship feel alive has atrophied. Rather than reviving that dimension within his existing relationship, which would require vulnerability, honest communication, and sustained effort, the partnered man projects his anima onto someone new. He seeks out a woman who reawakens those dormant feelings, and he experiences that awakening as falling in love, or finding his soulmate, or discovering someone who truly understands him. Ruth was 70 when she met Thomas at a lecture series on philosophy. He was married, but immediately captivated by Ruth's intellectual curiosity and emotional expressiveness. "My wife and I have been together for 40 years, he told Ruth, but we barely talk anymore. We're roommates, not partners. Then I met you, and I remembered what it feels like to really connect with someone. What Thomas didn't realize is that he wasn't connecting with Ruth as a complete person. He was connecting with the parts of himself that he'd abandoned within his marriage. Ruth represented his lost emotionality, his buried intellectual curiosity, his dormant capacity for deep conversation. She was a mirror, showing him aspects of himself he hadn't seen in years. Jung would say that Thomas needed to reclaim those qualities within himself and bring them back into his primary relationship, not act them out through an affair or emotional entanglement with someone else. But that's hard work. It requires acknowledging his role in allowing his marriage to become shallow. It requires risking vulnerability with a wife who might reject his attempts to deepen their connection after years of superficiality. It's much easier, psychologically speaking, to find someone new who makes accessing those feelings effortless, rather than doing the difficult work of excavating them within an established relationship. Ruth eventually recognized that Thomas wasn't really interested in her as a full human being, with flaws, complications, and daily realities. He was interested in the idealized version of her that lived in his imagination, the version that represented everything his marriage wasn't. The moment Ruth expressed a need that conflicted with Thomas's fantasy, or showed a side of herself that was less than perfect, his interest would evaporate. Because she wasn't actually a partner to him. She was a psychological band-aid he was using to cover a wound he refused to properly treat. There's another layer to this that Jung explored extensively. The concept of the puer aeternus, the eternal boy who refuses to grow up and take full responsibility for his choices. The partnered man who pursues you while maintaining his primary relationship is often operating from this puer energy. He wants the security and stability of his established partnership, the shared history, the financial entanglement, the social status of being in a committed relationship. But he also wants the excitement, novelty, and ego validation that comes from conquest and new romance. He wants to eat his cake and have it too, as the saying goes, and he wants to do so without facing any real consequences. Helen was 66 when she became involved with Kenneth, a man who'd been with his girlfriend for 12 years. Kenneth pursued Helen with an intensity that felt overwhelming in the best possible way. He'd show up at her house with flowers. He'd write her long emails about how she'd changed his life. He'd talk about a future together, about trips they'd take, about building something real. But when Helen asked Kenneth directly about his plans to leave his girlfriend, the conversation would shift. He'd explain that the situation was complicated. His girlfriend was going through a difficult time at work, and he couldn't abandon her now. Or they had a trip planned in 3 months that was already paid for, and it didn't make sense to cancel it. Or his girlfriend's mother was sick, and he couldn't add to her stress by ending the relationship right now. There was always a reason why now wasn't the right time, but someday, definitely someday, he'd make it happen. Jung would recognize this pattern immediately. Kenneth was operating in what Jung called provisional life, always preparing for the real thing to begin, but never actually beginning it. He was living in possibility rather than reality, which allowed him to avoid the difficult choices and concrete actions that adulting requires. The puer wants endless options without commitment. He wants to keep every door open. He wants to postpone difficult decisions indefinitely while still enjoying the benefits of pursuing multiple contradictory paths. And the partnered man who seeks you while maintaining his primary relationship is often deeply entrenched in this psychological pattern. Helen's breakthrough came when she realized that Kenneth had been telling her soon for 18 months. Soon he'd leave his girlfriend. Soon they'd be together properly. Soon his life would be arranged in a way that made room for her. But soon never came, because Kenneth had no intention of disrupting his comfortable setup. He wanted the domestic stability his girlfriend provided and the romantic excitement Helen provided, and he saw no reason why he should have to choose. Jung believed that psychological maturity requires making difficult choices and accepting their consequences. It means closing certain doors so that others can fully open. It means taking responsibility for the impact of our decisions on other people. The partnered man who seeks you while avoiding this kind of mature decision-making isn't someone building toward a future with you. He's someone stuck in perpetual adolescence, and you're one of the toys he doesn't want to put away, even though he's too old to be playing with toys.
Jung also wrote about what he called the problem of opposites, the human tendency to be torn between conflicting desires, values, and identities. And this is where we get to the heart of what's really going on when a partnered man seeks you. He's caught between opposing forces, security and excitement, familiarity and novelty, responsibility and freedom, the known and the unknown. Rather than choosing or finding a way to integrate these opposites within a single relationship or within himself, he's attempting to live both sides of the contradiction simultaneously through compartmentalization. Patricia was 64 when she met David, who'd been married for 38 years. David was the definition of compartmentalized. He had his marriage life, which included his home, his adult children, his social circle, his financial structures. And he had his Patricia life, which was entirely separate. Different restaurants, different neighborhoods, different conversations, different identities. With his wife, David was responsible, predictable, focused on practical matters. With Patricia, he was spontaneous, romantic, emotionally expressive. He'd tell Patricia, "You bring out a side of me that no one else sees." And he genuinely seemed to believe that the man he was with her was his true self, while the man he was at home was just going through the motions. But Jung would say that both versions are real, and the problem is David's refusal to integrate them. He split himself into two partial identities rather than becoming a whole person who contains multitudes. And that split isn't sustainable, because at some point the compartments leak into each other. The lie gets discovered, the double life collapses, and when it does, the woman he was pursuing outside his primary relationship is often the one who gets hurt most, because she's not protected by marriage, shared history, or social structures. Patricia learned this the hard way when David's wife discovered their relationship. Suddenly, David's promises about leaving evaporated. Suddenly, he was fighting to save his marriage, attending couples counseling, recommitting to his wife. And Patricia? She was erased, blocked on every platform, cut off completely. Because when the compartments collided, David chose the one that was legally, financially, and socially protected, and Patricia was simply collateral damage. Jung believed that psychological health requires facing these contradictions head-on, making conscious choices, and accepting that every involves involves sacrifice. The mature person recognizes that you cannot have everything simultaneously, and attempting to do so causes harm to everyone involved, including yourself. The partnered man who seeks you is attempting to bypass this fundamental truth of human existence. He's trying to have the contradiction without the cost, the excitement without the risk, the affair without the consequences. And you are being used as a tool in his failed attempt at psychological integration.
Here's what makes this situation particularly painful for women over 60. We should be past this. We should have learned these lessons decades ago. We should be able to spot manipulation and projection and compartmentalization from a mile away. But the truth is that these dynamics are sophisticated, And the men who engage in them have often spent their entire lives perfecting the art of making their dysfunction look like deep connection. They're skilled at making you feel chosen, special, irreplaceable. They know how to frame their pursuit as something meaningful, rather than what it actually is, a symptom of their unresolved psychological issues. Carol, Barbara, Ruth, Helen, Patricia, all of these women are intelligent, emotionally aware, experienced in relationships. And every single one of them got caught in this trap. Not because they were foolish, but because they were dealing with men who were expert at hiding their true intentions, sometimes even from themselves. Jung's work teaches us that most people are unconscious of their own motivations. The partnered man pursuing you genuinely might not understand that he's using you as a projection screen, that he's avoiding his own shadow work, that he's refusing to integrate his contradictions. He might truly believe that what he feels for you is love, is fate, is his one chance at happiness. But his sincerity doesn't change the reality of what's happening, and it doesn't obligate you to participate in his psychological drama. So, what do you do if you find yourself in this situation? First, you get ruthlessly honest about what's actually being offered. Not what he says will happen someday, not what you hope might develop, but what's actually on the table right now. Is he willing to leave his partner within a specific, concrete time frame? Not someday, not eventually, not when the circumstances are better, but in the next 30 to 60 days with visible steps toward that goal. If not, then what's being offered is a permanent position as the hidden woman, the secret, the compartmentalized side piece. Are you okay with that? Not in theory, not if things change, but right now as it actually exists. Most women aren't. And that's not because we're demanding or unreasonable. It's because we understand our own worth, and we refuse to accept crumbs when we deserve the whole meal. Second, recognize that his patterns with his current partner will become his patterns with you if you do end up together. The man who cheats with you will cheat on you. The man who lies to his wife to spend time with you will lie to you when someone new catches his attention. The man who compartmentalizes his life to maintain multiple relationships simultaneously has demonstrated exactly what he'll do when sustaining intimacy becomes difficult. Third, understand that you're not healing him, saving him, or showing him what real love is. You're enabling his refusal to do his own psychological work. Every time you accept his excuses, believe his promises, or agree to remain hidden, you're participating in his avoidance of growth. Jung would say that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to play a role in someone's unconscious drama, because that refusal forces them to finally face themselves.
Carol eventually ended things with James, not because she stopped feeling attracted to him or because the connection felt less real, but because she recognized that real connection requires honesty, commitment, and integration, none of which James was offering. Barbara stopped seeing Martin when she realized his pursuit had nothing to do with valuing her and everything to do with using her to avoid dealing with his marriage. Ruth, Helen, and Patricia all made similar choices at different points, recognizing that being someone's projection screen isn't the same as being someone's partner. Were these decisions easy? Absolutely not. Did these women grieve what might have been? Of course. But they also recognized something crucial. The fantasy of what could be was preventing them from finding what actually exists, which is a man who's available, honest, and capable of offering real partnership rather than compartmentalized secrecy. Jung believed that the second half of life is about integration, about becoming whole, about facing the parts of ourselves we've avoided and bringing them into conscious awareness. For women over 60, that means refusing to participate in relationships that require us to fragment ourselves, to hide, to accept less than we deserve, to become supporting characters in someone else's drama. You're not the escape from his real life. You are real life, and you deserve a partner who treats you that way. You deserve someone who's proud to claim you publicly, who introduces you to his world rather than hiding you from it, who builds a future with you rather than keeping you as a permanent maybe. If a partnered man is seeking you, what's really going on has very little to do with your specialness and everything to do with his unresolved issues. Recognizing that isn't cynical. It's self-preservation. It's wisdom. It's the kind of clarity that comes from understanding human psychology deeply enough to spot the patterns that less experienced people miss. So if you're in this situation right now, I want you to ask yourself, am I okay being someone's shadow work? Am I comfortable being the projection screen for qualities he refuses to develop within himself? Am I willing to be compartmentalized indefinitely while he maintains his primary relationship? If the answer to any of those questions is no, then you know what you need to do. And it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be honest. And at this stage of life, honesty is worth more than fantasy. Leave a comment below if this resonated with you, share your experience if you're comfortable, or just write, "I understand now," because every comment helps this video reach another woman who needs to hear this truth. And share this video with women in your life who might be dealing with the situation. We protect each other through education. We break these patterns by naming them clearly. You deserve full partnership, not half-hidden secrecy. Never forget that. I'll see you in the next video.